going into this, what you think you might be looking for might not actually end up being what you need by the end of it. You might be exposed to things that you didn't realize you don't want, but then you clearly understand that's something I don't need or don't want at this point. But I'd recommend talking to a range just so you can understand really what's out there, what your options are, and that'll help you really hone in on exactly what you want and find hopefully the perfect partner.
This is You Should Talk To, a podcast for busy marketing leaders who are looking for support and tips on getting shit done. In each episode, Daniel Weiner interviews marketing leaders and discusses their experience, successes, and failures around hiring agencies. If you're interested in finding and choosing the right agency partner, then let's jump in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the You Should Talk To podcast. I am Daniel Weiner, and this podcast is brought to you by myself as well as You Should Talk To until we get a sponsor. Maybe that day is today. You Should Talk To pairs brands and marketers for free with vetted agencies and or freelancers for pretty much any marketing or tech need, because finding great agencies is an enormous pain in the ass. Super excited to be joined today by Dave Manders, who is the WaterCraft Advertising Supervisor at a brand I presume most everybody has heard of, Yamaha Motor Corporation. Dave, thank you so much for joining. This has been a couple weeks in the works, and we finally got it on the books. I think my computer broke last time, and you were relieved to not have to do it, and now we're here.
Yeah, you nailed it. But you got me eventually. Thanks for having me. Super pumped about it.
Awesome. Well, let's jump right in. Dave, you've been in marketing for a while. What is an unpopular opinion or a hot take of sorts that you have in the marketing world?
Yeah. So, I don't know how industry applicable this one is, but it's super specific to something we're going through right now. And that is content is king, but distribution is equally as important.
Ugh, you're preaching to the choir here as somebody with a podcast who gets a ton of content and then is like, oh, I forget I also have to distribute this stuff.
Yeah. It's a pain in the ass. We've, at Yamaha in our WaterCraft division, we've spent a lot of time over the past few years just really focusing and investing in the type of content we're creating and really how we're telling our story and the shape our messaging is taking. But we've been struggling a lot with then what to do with that content, because you make something beautiful and you're super proud of it. You're pumped about it and it's your whole world. But then it's such a sad realization when you realize the rest of the world has no idea what you've done. So figuring out really how to get that content out there and in front of the right people is something that we're learning how to do. It's a big reason of why we found you. And so, we're learning just how important that piece of the puzzle is as well.
I literally had a call yesterday with my podcast agency. I was like, do you guys offer a solution to actually distribute the content? And they were like, no, not currently. I was like, I'm dying to pay you more money. Like, please take my money if I do not have to handle content distribution. It's, I think everybody deals with that truthfully. Like, we were all told like, oh, we have to create all this content and we need to be on all these channels and stuff. And we forget the second half of that is, after you create it, like, what do you actually do with the stuff and who do you target and how do you target and all that sort of good stuff?
Totally. Yeah. If you're looking for a distribution agency, I might know a guy.
That's good to know. Give me his contact after. I feel like Yamaha has its hand in more things than myself, as well as just the general public actually realize. Can you talk a little bit about Yamaha in general and also like your particular lane that you focus on?
Yeah. Yamaha is huge. So a lot of people might hear Yamaha and think a piano. Some people might hear Yamaha and think a dirt bike.
I think jet ski. Jet ski is my first. If Yamaha comes into play, I think jet ski from college and having two roommates with lake houses.
Okay, so that's interesting you say that because jet ski is actually such a painful word for me to hear paired with our brand Yamaha, because Yamaha, we specifically make the Wave Runner. And
Gotcha.
Jet ski they're made by Kawasaki, and it has become this industry term synonymous with personal watercraft. So
this is a learning moment for all of us. Normally I would never, want to say the brand of a competitor or something. I thought jet ski was truthfully the term for the actual watercraft, which is super interesting.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing to think about. I can't speak to exactly why that is. If you look at market share and the number of units that are out there, there are actually the ourselves and other competitors are leading the market over jet skis, but it's still the term that most people use to equate personal watercraft with any of the brands. We see that in our data and research. A lot of times the numbers can be skewed just because of that too, in terms of understanding like brand recognition or how people relate to the brand. So it's fascinating.
It's a good thing that I've already helped you guys, because I don't have to worry as much about putting my foot in my mouth like I just did. That's super interesting though. I presume I'm not the only one who has made that faux pas over the years.
Happens all the time. It's one of my favorite things to call out and correct people on in everyday conversation. But yeah. So Yamaha has, we do everything. In Japan, we sell pre-made lined pools. So we have a hand in everything, but you can think about our two companies. There's a music company and there's a motor company, and we're kind of sisters, but there's not much overlap there. And then within the motor company, we make tons of products, but my specialty is on anything jet powered on the water. So jet powered boats and wave runners are what we focus on.
Awesome. And you've had agency experience in the past, and now you've switched to brand side. Do you think that experience has made you more sympathetic to the woes of agencies, or better at being a partner to agencies?
I like to hope so. Yeah, I think one of my biggest perspectives when working with an agency is that it's an opt-in relationship. No one's forcing that. I have asked for there to be other experts that I get to partner with and work with. So as a client, I never want to be the client that's not going to listen to the expertise of that company that I've asked to work with me. I think one of my least favorite things when working at an agency was, hearing no a lot and then being told no without much of an explanation. So one of the things we try to do is I'll always listen to a rationale. Even if I disagree with it at first, I want to hear your explanation why you're selling something or you're fighting for something, or why you think it'll work, because I can't be the expert in everything. So I want to hear your perspective since you are the expert in something else. And then I try to never just say no without an explanation, because if my answer does have to be no, I want to give you the context of why, so that maybe you can help me find a different solution that does work better. And those are really two principles that I'm trying to preach to my team and that we try to live by with our agency work.
Sure. And do the different divisions of Yamaha interact with each other much, or do you kind of stay on your side line and stuff like that? Or is there shared resources, shared knowledge, or is it not necessarily applicable between, say, WaterCraft and, music?
Music is a totally different business. Yeah, we actually lease the name Yamaha from them technically. So there's not much overlap there. And then within the motor division or the motor company, there's some overlap. So WaterCraft is part of the larger marine business unit. So there's a huge part of our business that sells outboard motors and makes outboard motors. We work with a lot of boat manufacturers to put those motors onto. So there is definitely some overlap within the marine business unit, focusing on products on the water as a whole. And then occasionally we will work with the motorsports division, so motorcycles and dirt bikes. They're doing some pretty cool, innovative things that we're trying to learn from right now. And then, same with other divisions like golf car or even power sports like pressure washers or generators. We have access to so many resources. We like to try to work together when we can.
Sure. How many of your friends hit you up for a discount on any of the products? Is that a daily occurrence, or I expect we're in the holiday season currently?
It happens frequently. Yeah, I have gotten reached out to by two friends recently. Now that we're approaching the holidays.
It'd be funny if I had them in my place where I'm like, come on, let's talk about it right now. If that was the surprise of the podcast.
Oh man, I have another call. I need to go.
An 8-minute podcast episode would be a new record low, so we don't have to dive into that. I do want to dive into our experience together, though.
Sure.
When we first got set up together, Yamaha was looking to explore potential agency relationships for a Q4 campaign launch. If you're comfortable sharing some of the details around that for the listeners before we get into, like your first impression of working with me and all that sort of stuff, what was the actual launch, in the campaign in your words?
Yeah. So, I love this campaign. It's actually really cool. So we're taking an entire campaign effort and we're focusing it on growing our female audience. The boating industry is really a traditional industry, and frankly, most brands are talking to old white men with money. No one is really investing the time to speak to other audiences. And, especially through the pandemic, we've actually seen minority audiences grow in terms of who's owning and purchasing boats, who's using boats, who's going out on the water. So as a brand who plays in that industry so much, it's really a duty to make sure we're speaking to all audiences, not just one. So the campaign we're launching is focused on speaking to women and really just promoting female boat ownership and supporting the female use of boats, getting women out on the water and kind of breaking into that industry and just making sure we're taking the time to intentionally speak to that audience.
That's great. I'm curious. I presume it's not terrible since we're here, but when you first heard of me and You Should Talk To and like what I do, what was your first impression? Even before we spoke, was there hesitancy? Was it excitement? To some people in marketing, like the concept of what I do is weird or new or just, since I'm free to the marketing side, it's not, too good to be true, or like there's got to be some sort of catch. I'm curious. What was your kind of first impression before we actually spoke?
Yeah, too good to be true. Yeah, I think the RFP process can be quite cumbersome and overwhelming.
That's a dirty word in my world. Now you're going to give me chest palpitations with the word RFP. I'm not a fan of the traditional RFP process.
I agree. No, I think just never having met you before, I wasn't sure what the process would be. And again, it sounded a little too good to be true, but I'm super glad that I found you for sure.
It's interesting. I certainly have a process and took you through a process, but that process is so different I shouldn't say so different. It's structurally the same, I would say, for like most everybody that I help, but it's so nuanced just based on the brand that I'm chatting with and like what they're actually looking for that like I feel like the process meanders differently. And like you gave me amazing access. I think we talked after every round, which we'll get into later. But now, I mean, when you first came to the table, you were more prepared than, 98% of the folks that I help. You had what I would call like beyond a brief, a mega document. I think it was 100 pages or 100 slides from another agency partner of yours that had put that together, which made my job easier, at least coming to the table with like, a baseline starting point. I'm curious, like if you can kind of put yourself in your own shoes from before the process, what did you think you were looking for from an agency partner at that time?
Yeah. So I guess first to speak to that, we call it our campaign playbook. It is a massive document full of data, full of recommendations, full of really just creating this persona that we've been looking at, that is this female that has the propensity to become a boater, really who she is, what she does, how we can speak to her, what does she want to hear from a brand like ours. There was a lot of work, multi-year project that went into that. So we were really happy to have that foundation when we started looking for an agency to work with for this campaign. We also had a lot of the creative ready to go. We've been developing creative all year. So now we got to this point, kind of like I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, where we have this content, we have this story we're ready to tell, but now we needed to figure out really how are we going to tell this story? How are we going to distribute this content and get it out to the right people? So going into this, I mean, we've usually been very traditional in our media efforts, and there's a huge opportunity for us to be doing more in the digital space, doing more in the paid social space. We've dipped our toes in streaming and connected TV, but, are we doing that the smartest way possible? These are all areas of opportunity that we had. And with this campaign, we really wanted to rethink where and how we're talking about ourselves and telling our story, because this audience is somewhere totally different than our traditional customer usually is. So that was a really cool opportunity. But because of that, we wanted an agency that had the propensity to really tell and share their expertise with us on how we can be doing that better and in different ways than we have done traditionally. So that was a big key for us. I think another thing we were looking for was we needed metrics. Metrics are something we always talk about in marketing, but as someone who focuses on the brand, metrics are one of the hardest things for us to do. It's very hard to measure just brand awareness. So we wanted to be able to incorporate KPIs and metrics with this campaign. And then I think we were also just looking for someone that would play well with others and just connected with us. I'm a big believer that you have to be able to have a connection with who you're working with. We also have a few other agencies and a few other partners that are huge, huge partners of ours. And we wanted this new agency to come in and kind of collaborate well with them and not necessarily compete with them.
I talk about it a lot. I mean, it fortunately or unfortunately, my hot take of sorts is that the work doesn't matter. And what I mean by that is if you don't mesh well, you don't even get to do the work or talk about the work or be involved in the process. So it is a little bit of a popularity contest on the front end, I find. You can still do terrible. There's plenty of people who get hired who then do terrible work and it ends because of that. However, like no one really gets hired if they're not liked or if they are hated by the brand that they are speaking to. So I preach that a lot to my agency partners of process and relationship being the most important part, because if you don't nail that, you don't get to do anything else, which is why like when people tell me, oh, we're the best at something, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't think anybody's really the best at anything. Like,
I agree.
You're the best for certain situations or certain clients, or like you're a good option, for those situations. But, there's talent everywhere.
100%. I think a relationship is key. I think that's why, I've been at Yamaha a little over 5 years. I think that's why we've worked with the same agencies since I've started, because the relationship is there. And as you work with someone over the years, you cultivate that relationship. They know your pain points, you know theirs. You learn how to work well with each other. I think that's huge. I was listening to another one of your podcasts recently, and I think the prospect was talking about vibes, good vibes. And I was like, yes, that's key. Like, you need good vibes. You need that connection, because at the end of the day, you're having to do work with these people and you're having to hold each other accountable and communicate and trust them and all of these aspects that go into a relationship, and they need to be present in a working relationship as well.
Yeah, I'd say even more so for a brand like Yamaha that has name recognition and is a quote unquote like household name brand. It just has bigger ramifications. You're putting more trust into a partner where if in the off chance something goes awry or something like that, or they say the dreaded J word that I said that I won't say the rest of the podcast, like it just has bigger, it's amplified more because of who you all are versus, again, if you're a small brand that no one's heard of, you still want to trust your agency, of course, but like a mess up or something like that doesn't have the ripple effect that it potentially has for a brand like Yamaha. So I totally get that as well.
Totally. And especially with a project like this, there's budget at play. And it's budget you're spending with someone new. So, we do whatever we can to filter, to learn, to make sure we're making the right choice and we're putting our money somewhere that is going to benefit us at the end. Part of that is just feeling like we're in a safe place, like the money we're putting somewhere is going to accomplish what we want. That's a big piece of it too.
Sure. So you and I spoke for roughly like 45 minutes, if I remember correctly. It's probably some back and forth over email, and then ultimately made introductions. I believe per my recommendation for something of this size and stature, we made introductions to 5 agencies with the goal being to shortlist to 3 and have those 3 pitch. So let's talk about the first round a little bit. First impressions, it actually worked out like relatively perfect unintentionally that you all had if I remember correctly, a clear 3 favorites out of the 5 and stuff like that. But I'm curious, like even before you spoke, I make intros and you can look at their websites. Was there any hesitancy of like, I believe I also explained like my thinking around the 5 agencies of like why I introduced them and stuff. Did you have any first impressions or preconceived notions even going into the calls? Or was it like, these all seem like reasonable introductions that Danny has made?
Yeah, I tried very, very specifically hard not to research these too in depth before they were able to make their pitches or introductions, because I just wanted to come in with a blank slate. So I did glance at their websites, but really more for quality level, less for content, just a quick little litmus test. But I tried to keep a blank slate, and, I think that helped. We wanted to see a range, and I think we definitely got that. And I loved being able to speak to such a range of agencies, both in size, geography, offerings, specialty. That's what we wanted, and that's what we got in the first round for sure.
Sure. And what ultimately led you, if you can remember back from then, like the 2 that you said, probably not going to be the best fit for this work? Do you recall like what ultimately led to that decision? Was it the other 3 just being stronger, or were there specifics that kind of stood out of like why you didn't want to move them on to the next round?
Yeah. They're really testing my memory here.
I know it's my own fault. If my computer didn't break, we could have done this a couple weeks ago,
No, there was a combination of factors. I think from the start, 3 just stood out very strongly. The 2 that we kind of decided to not move forward with in the first round, I think they had a kind of a range of specialties and focuses that didn't quite align with our needs at the time. So one of the things we were looking for was the ability to provide a robust media campaign. And what I mean by that is not just paid digital, but also more traditional if the need arose. So with this campaign, we are very much focused on digital, but with every campaign, that's not always the case. And we do a lot of traditional. I'm not looking to go through this process every time we run a new campaign. So the hope to do future work with the same agency is definitely there. And one of the agencies just simply didn't really have the capability to provide traditional media support or planning. They were very digital focused, also very focused on data and analytics, which is huge. Normally that would be something any brand would run towards. But we are fortunate enough to have an internal data and research team that did a lot of the work for this campaign. So it's just not something we had a really strong need for at the time. I think the second of those was they had a very strong focus on e-commerce and kind of product movement, building the product channels. And I'll be honest, through the pandemic, we've been very fortunate in demand for our product. When people were told they couldn't spend money to go travel, they quickly realized that
got every toy they could.
Yeah, that they could get their families out on the water as a fun escape from the house. I mean, you saw that spike not only in boating, but every outdoor adventure industry. I think RVs shot up, mountain bikes shot up. So, people were just dying to get outside, and boating was no exception to that. So we really weren't looking for someone to help us move the product or grow an e-commerce footprint, but we were looking for partners that could help us tell our story a little better and a little differently than we maybe have been before.
Sure. So after that portion, you moved 3 agencies to the quote unquote finals. And it was a really close call. And I'm curious to hear, share, of course, what you're comfortable with. And this isn't to, make the agency that lost, who may listen, feel bad, or the agency that won feel better than they presumably do. But like you mentioned that it was a really close call, and you all, so close that you all left the room and went home and kind of slept on it and stuff like that. So I'm curious, like, what ultimately led you to pick who you did? And also just tell me, as much as you're comfortable with, what were the conversations like in that room when you were evaluating? If I remember correctly, of the 3, 2 rose to the top pretty quickly of like, these are the 2 we're picking between. Talk me through those conversations between you and your team, like after you were pitched to and all that.
Yeah. It was a very hard decision. I think the 3 that made it to that round, they did a great job of listening. They showed us that they took that campaign playbook and totally dissected it and understood it inside and out, and really got who we were as a brand and what we were trying to do with this campaign. They each provided, potential media plans that totally accomplished what we wanted. They helped us develop KPIs and metrics and showed a propensity to really build out that program a little more. And then they all came to the table with something extra, a little lagniappe, a little bonus, which I love to see, because it wasn't just taking what we asked for, but it was taking it, understanding it, and running a little further.
Damn straight they did. All my partners should come to the table with something extra for getting them in with you guys.
Yeah, no, they showed up for sure. So it was a really hard decision because our initial filters were all met. All the boxes were checked it. And we were kind of left in this place where we were having to identify new boxes or new filters to really compare them up against each other. And I think the company that we ended up going with, one of the things that stood out to us is our first call, they came on the call with their whole team from the top to the bottom and actually took the time to introduce each of them and explain their levels of expertise. And we really got to see behind the curtain a little bit, which was huge. If you're buying a new car, you want to look at the engine. You want to totally understand what's happening under the hood and make sure that it's what you need. It's going to totally understand that it is what you need it to be. And we felt like we were able to do that with this agency. I think size also came into play, which we didn't think would be a huge factor from the start. But this agency was they were a nice size. They weren't too small. They weren't too big. We already work with a pretty big agency on the creative side. So we didn't want someone who was too big and really going to compete with them. But we like having a, mid-sized team because they can be nimble. They can tap in and out as different needs arise. And that was something that stood out to us. And then ultimately they were local, which again, we didn't think we cared about from the start, but when it came down to it, we really liked being able to support both the Atlanta industry, but then also just access, being able to drive down for a meeting or have them come up easily. I love a good in-person meeting, especially now that we can have them again. So that helped make our decision as well too.
And did the going home and sleeping on it change anybody's minds, or it landed the way that it did the night before?
Yeah, no, it landed the way it did the night before.
Okay.
I think
Just curious if anybody was like, I had this grand revelation and now I think this way, or anything like that after taking some time.
No, I think after duking it out for a little bit internally, we did end up in one place where we were happy, but we all just wanted to take a moment and make sure that was the right move with a good overnight rest. I think both, I had one agency I was pushing for, and my supervisor had another that she was leaning towards, and we ended up just making a list of pros and cons. And, both were very, very smart teams that we felt would challenge us and push us to evolve and grow, which is, anything I could ask for out of an agency partnership. So at the end, it did just come down to those few items.
Sure. Did you have any grand kind of takeaways or learnings from going through this process with me, or just talking to some different agencies that you wouldn't have normally presumably found on your own?
Yeah, totally. I think it's that range piece. Anyone going through this, I recommend talking to agencies or prospects on all ends of the spectrum, because going into this, what you think you might be looking for might not actually end up being what you need by the end of it. Or you might be exposed to new concepts and new ways of thinking that, really stick with you and click with you. Or you might be exposed to things that you didn't realize you don't want, but then you clearly understand that's something I don't need or don't want at this point. But I'd recommend talking to a range just so you can understand really what's out there, what your options are. And that'll help you really hone in on exactly what you want and find hopefully the perfect partner.
Yeah, I think that's something I've realized in the last 2 years that I do that is like an unintentional benefit of me coming from agency side. Like I often talk to brands who have a very specific ask, like, hey, we're looking for, A, B, and C, and we want an agency to have like these 3 experiences or characteristics. And like after talking, I'm like, I think you should really chat with these folks who like, sometimes it's literally, I'm just like, just trust me. And they're like, okay. Other times I have to like, I'm like, because of these 10 reasons, like, but just trust me, take the conversation or take the call. And like, it gives them different perspective. And oftentimes they hire like that. Like you don't realize until you have some conversations. And I think it gives you different perspective. And oftentimes maybe it reinforces what you thought you were looking for, but makes you more confident in it. But yeah, I think it's good to be challenged and talk to somebody who may be coming from a different perspective or different skill set or different experience level.
Yeah, if I went into this just totally blind without your help, I would have been talking to one very consistent type of agency. Little variation, they all would have been saying very likely the same thing. I might not have found the best option for me. And, the choice could have been harder because they could have been less different. So I think we as a team learned a lot of what we wanted through this process. Even, it was a collaborative effort with myself. I'm on more of the brand and advertising side, and our digital expert who focuses on, all digital efforts. I think we both learned a little bit how to work better with each other, but then each other's needs and priorities through this process just by talking to a variance of prospects.
Sure. This is the shameless plug time for me because you've been very complimentary. I'm curious if you had to pick what was the best or the most helpful part. I mean, it sounds like you mentioned just the variance and types of agencies you probably wouldn't have spoken with. I presume there was a time saving effort. I think I sent you the 5 intros like the day after we spoke. I'd have to look back. Was it just the agencies being relevant? Talk me through that. Like, what was the most helpful to you and your team of working through me for this? Other than being free, of course. I presume that was nice.
Yeah, that did not suck. No, I think there were 2 aspects. I know you shy away from the word RFP, but essentially you did have a template to really just help me organize my thoughts and really vocalize our needs. And I'm not sure we would have been able to organize what we wanted in a way that we did if we started from a blank slate. So I think that was super helpful because, yeah, it just helped us get organized and really understand our priorities. And then I think the other piece of this was time and having access and sourcing those prospects. We went through this process during our annual product launch. So it's our biggest project of the year. Everything we do in marketing is leading up to this annual product launch. And there's no way I would have been able to create an RFP, source potential prospects, have interviews, reviews, all of this happening while also launching our model year 24 lineup. So I think just the time saving there and then also access to prospects. I'm not sure where I would have found potential agency partners. I'm not sure how I would have gotten them or gotten my RFP in front of them. So I think you just having access to that network and then bringing options to the table was a huge win for our team as well.
Awesome. I love to hear it. Is there anything in the process that you would change or that you'd like to see different or, potentially me update or anything based on our experience working together?
No.
Good to hear. Don't even say anything else, Dave. We'll just move on from that. No, I mean, I always ask people that. It's so funny you say that too, because I can't remember who the prospect was, but they asked me for 3 introductions to agencies, and they said that they would have liked to review portfolios. I get that often, people asking to review, and to your point, it sounds like we agree. I'm anti that which I don't even share websites prior if I don't have to, because I don't want people to get a preconceived notion. It's impossible to tell your story. I mean, I could do an entire podcast series on just that. I'm the connector of saying hey, based on our conversation, I've worked in an agency for 7 years. Trust me, this conversation is going to make sense, and you can yell at me after if not. And 99.9% of the time, I'm right, which is I don't want to say in a cocky way, but I'm you're here. We've had this conversation. Put one more layer of trust in me. It's one conversation out of your life, and I presume you're going to understand why, and they always do. So I'm anti that, but is there anything you can think of that would have been more helpful or additional support?
Yeah, no, I think we talked a lot before we really went into this process to understand where each other were, how this worked, all of those things. But I think had we had this conversation, more closely after the review process, my answer might have been different. Hindsight is always 2020.
Sure.
I think at first, I wasn't thrilled that I got a few prospects that really didn't hit some of the key filters we had placed from the start. But now looking back, I mean, that was one of my favorite things about this. And I said that, seeing the range just to understand capabilities that I did want and that were important to me. So yeah, I had to trust you through this process, but it ended up working out. So it really was great. I wish I had been less busy and been more able to focus.
No, you gave me more access than most do, truthfully. I believe we talked after every single round of at least the first 2 rounds. And I know after the finals, you called to tell me who you chose. But no, I mean, that's so important too. And I think a lot of brands don't truthfully take advantage of my willingness to talk as much as I am to make sure that they're feeling good about it and stuff. And I presume talking through it with me, after having some of the agency conversations made it easier to move through the process and stuff like that, having that soundboard.
Yeah, no, I think soundboard's a great word for it. You're an expert in this field. It's the same thing I was talking about in what I want from my other agency partners. I want experts in different fields because I can be an expert of nothing.
Sure.
If not, definitely not an expert of everything. So I think having access to someone who does play in this field well and just a good sounding board while you somehow maintained being unbiased and not, shepherding me to one decision over another, respecting your prospects, I think was great. So that's definitely something we appreciated from this part of the process. I struggled to find something wrong with it because I hate just giving total positive feedback.
The perfect process. Cut.
The cynic in me always tries to find some criticism, but I think I just had such a negative perspective of what this process was going to be doing it on my own that, I hate to say it, the bar was so low, Daniel, you could only win.
It's an exhausting process. I truthfully feel even I'm helping a really, I will say a large engagement currently. It's been going on for about 2 months now. And it's in the final round right now of pitches. And it's exhausting. I mean, you get to a certain point. It's hard to enjoy it. Truthfully, I like to think I attempt to keep it light and make it fun because you can only listen to so many pitches. And again, they're different, but they're the same in the sense that you're talking through the same structure. It gets repetitive and occasionally boring and stuff like that. And you want to give them all your attention and all of that. But yeah, it's just an exhausting, arduous process. I think my process makes it as fun as possible outside of the RFP process. I just don't think you get a good feel for who people are if you have a very strict RFP, even the RFI, request for information process, just asking agencies to tell you about themselves. You just don't get the personality side. And to your point, the relationships and meshing together and the quote unquote vibes have to be there.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. You are totally right. I could not make this decision through a piece of paper or even a deck. I need to know the people that I'm going to be working with. So
Sure. Do you think an agency relationship or situation, once it has turned mildly negative or something bad has happened, can be salvaged? Or do you think like once it's crossed a certain point, whether it contractually ends or not, it's actually over?
That's a tough one. I think there are definitely partnerships that just aren't always right. And, maybe there's a timeline on those, regardless of how much each side tries. But I do think it's just like a normal relationship. If there are issues, if things aren't going perfectly, I think the only way to come back from that would be for both sides to really understand what the issues are, to see that there are issues, first of all, and then really to understand what is wrong, what's not going perfectly, and then to communicate. And I think both sides really have to have a willingness to try to fix it, to change things, to shake things up, to make an effort to rectify whatever issues there might be. I've coming from the agency, there were times where, we did lose a client, and sometimes it seemed out of the blue. And, you can only know from that perspective how wrong a relationship might be going from what someone else is saying to you. So as a client, if you're not relaying to your agencies that there are issues or that you're having headaches, you're doing them a disservice and you're doing yourself a disservice. From an agency perspective, if things are feeling sour or off, you should be being proactive and reaching out and really trying to figure out what might be off and how you can be helping your client solve problems differently.
Yeah, I think there's a universal answer that I tell to both sides, truthfully, and it is 4 words. It is pick up the phone. And I find it's interesting. Another like unintended thing I didn't think that like working through me did for brands and agencies. So many times where like a brand will say, oh, an agency did this. I'm like, pick up the phone, call them. They're like, can we do that? I'm like, what do you mean? Yeah. And conversely, agency will be like, oh, this happened. I'm like, call them 10 times and leave a voicemail, talk to it. Like, They're going to like that. That's also the only opportunity. Like just stuff doesn't get solved over email. You can't tell what's going on with tone and voice and all that stuff. The answer to like 98% of the stress in the client agency relationship is pick up the phone. We can make it pick up the damn phone if we want to make it 5 words.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like people forget. And one of the questions I encourage agencies to ask every brand that I set them up with is, hey, if you're leaving another agency or you're exploring new agencies from a past relationship, what made that go sour? Or even if it wasn't that bad, like what were the pitfalls and negatives there that we want to avoid? Because oftentimes some of those things an agency may say, hey, that's kind of our process too, but here's what we would do differently, knowing that to like make sure you're, not getting into those same situations that made you all unhappy and stuff like that. I just feel like there could be significantly more open conversation between agencies and brands.
Totally. And, it's weird because we had a marketing summit recently where we brought together a handful of our vendors, really walk them through what's coming for the next year. We make a plan, and then we have a happy hour together. And in that, I got to meet some of the team that are remote that I hadn't gotten to meet in person yet. And one of them said, they made a comment and it was like, wow, other clients just don't treat us like this. I was mind blown. I was like what? Like real people? Like I was asking, we were talking about our personal lives and our significant others and, our views on where we live. And we even got a little political, and I was just very confused that, they could be treated like something other, because at the end of the day, we're all just people. We're all just doing work. We're all just trying to solve problems. And if I want to be respected like a person, I need to respect others like a person. And that to me is the only way this can be successful. But
life's too short for bad clients or bad agencies, I would say. And COVID, I think I knew that prior to COVID, but COVID, like I joke, like I just don't care. If somebody doesn't want to work with me, cool. We don't have to work together. Life's short. Like we just got through a 2.5-year pandemic. Like, I just don't care. And I think, most it's because it's transactional for a lot of the time. Like you all are a good example of a true partnership, and so many agencies say, oh, like we're looking for real partnerships. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're looking for good budgets. Like, you want the good partnership after, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, but the partnership has to arrive at some point,
Yeah, totally. And my boss comes from the agency as well. A person on my team comes from the agency as well. So I think we all kind of have that background and that understanding. But it is, we're small, we are nimble, we rely on our partners because there's just way too much work for us to be able to do internally and alone. So I think that's key, but it also goes back to, one of the filters was I do love having a local team that I can meet with in person,
Sure.
that we can, just kind of get a vibe check on. I think that's huge. And I don't think you can always get that solely remotely. So I think that's important in just maintaining a healthy relationship, but then also, God forbid, if we ever got to the place where we did need to salvage or rectify or kind of, realign some kind of way.
You can go yell at them in person, show up.
Yep. Yell at them in person and have a beer after. And I think that's much more likely to result in a positive outcome for sure.
Sure. You just mentioned your marketing summit that you had. I'm curious, the question I was going to ask is, what are you most bullish on in the marketing space? And I'm curious if any of that's incorporated. There's, on one spectrum, we've got like NFTs and metaverse and all that sort of stuff. And then on the complete opposite end, like person events are back and things like that. What are you most pumped about? Does Yamaha have a robust like trade show and then WaterCraft event type thing? Or like, what are you most excited about?
Yeah, we definitely have an events segment to our marketing efforts. There's a whole team. They're phenomenal. They do so much work. Even through COVID, they were actually finding things to go to. And then now that, we're back, they are just, I just looked at the events calendar with them and it is quite robust. Boat shows are huge. Boat shows are back. There's definitely tons there. I think one of the things I'm most excited about is really through the pandemic, we've had the ability to kind of shift focus and focus on the story we're telling, really focus on brand efforts. Because we were fortunate enough to kind of see high demand for our product, we didn't have to focus so much on selling. So as marketers, we were able to step away from the selling aspect and really focus on like, okay, what is the story we want to tell? We've been making this shift to become more of a lifestyle brand and speak less about the boat and the wave runner and really tell the story of the water. What does it mean to have a reverence for the water, to really respect the water, to have a desire to explore the water, to see a whole new world via the water that you might not have thought of before? And we're simply just a conduit to access that. So we've shifted a lot of our storytelling to really that aspect, and we're seeing some pretty cool content come out that revolves around that. We recently launched a series called the Run the Water video series, where we're highlighting different people in the marine industry in some kind of way. So one focused on an angler and a spear fisherman and really just told their story. Another one focused on a marine bioscientist and her partner who's a marine photographer and how they work together to really track and bring awareness to conservation in the marine industry. So really being able to tell those stories and not just talk about boats and wave runners is something that's so fascinating from my perspective. Now, I'm a nerd for brand. I'm a sucker for being able to tell a good story. So, I think that's something I'm very excited about. Now we just have to figure out really how to distribute that content and get the message out there.
Brand's having another, I'd say its moment, but it's had many moments. Yeah. But Airbnb recently put out a study. I don't know if you saw, all about brand. And I feel like right after that, it was like, oh, if Airbnb's focusing on brand, like we
can do it too.
But no, I think it is truly crucial. Like it's people, the product doesn't matter until it does. You have to tell a cohesive story and then the product matters. But like brand certainly matters. And I think the reason you talked about at the beginning of the podcast with metrics, like it's just hard to measure,
Yeah.
There's seasonality, there's sales cycles all over the place. People are just weird in general, consumers in general, so it's very hard to track the efficacy and stuff like that, but it's something that you have to do, especially for a brand like you all. So yeah, I think investing in that, even I hate to say the word blindly because I know you can track some of it, but I think it is something, it is a little bit of a leap of faith, and those that do not, who have the ability to, are missing out on a huge opportunity.
No, I totally agree. And you say product doesn't matter, but I think I agree. But funny enough,
until it does. That's what I mean.
Yeah, no, I think another huge opportunity for us, or something I'm super excited about, is connected product. So we usually trail behind the auto industry by a few years. So you've already seen it in cars, but something we're starting to look at is, and the industry is focusing on as a whole, is really connected products. So how can we better connect the user to their boat or wave runner? And that allows just so much opportunity because we can, create a better user experience on the product, but then we can also better cultivate the user experience off the product by allowing them to be more connected to their product, by learning how they use their product, by just giving them access to the product other than when they're on it. I think there's so much opportunity there. So yeah, it's kind of this fun dual dynamic of, let's talk about the brand, but then we ultimately do need to have the product to follow up. when we get them in.
I think I saw it actually, I want to say last night, the founder of Liquid Death. I saw an interview, the water company. I saw something with him that said, in general, everyone hates your marketing. They hate it so much, in fact, that they are willing to pay to not hear it, meaning like to squash ads on different platforms and stuff. And there's somebody else I follow on LinkedIn who says like, it's just a good reminder that like no one is thinking of your marketing as a consumer until the need comes. And that's with the time when brand comes. And I thought the Liquid Death thing was cool because I've never really thought of it like, man, I pay to not hear the advertisements from other people. So
100%.
It makes the brand marketer life more difficult, but I think truthfully more exciting. Like I get more excited about brand and storytelling than I do performance, media and marketing and stuff like that, even when it converts to sales and stuff, because I think it's just more interesting nowadays.
Totally. And we're storytellers. So to be able to connect to a customer on that level is so fascinating to me. I mean, part of the shift too that I was explaining comes from a place of just how do we better connect with customers that we have and customers that are coming. So we saw a huge influx of first-time buyers through the pandemic. And there was a little concern with how do we retain those customers? How do we make sure that we're really connecting with them, giving them a positive user experience from their first time? And part of that was just investing in the brand, investing in the story, and trying to better connect with them so that there is this affinity towards our brand. And so that, there's almost a badge of honor that comes with owning their boat. They're so proud and happy to finally be part of that brand that they've been engaging with, that they're just more likely to have a positive user experience. And more likely to maintain partnership with that brand. I'm a sucker for a brand name. I'll admit it. And there's plenty that I wear proudly and I'm a huge advocate of. And some of those I had an affinity for long before I actually bought into them. But then once I did buy into them, anything could go wrong. Not that things are going to go wrong with our products. Anything could go wrong. And I would be so forgiving because I still love that brand and have a partnership with them. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. My dad worked in pharmaceutical for 30 years, and I can remember being a kid and him he worked on the generic side. And I remember him telling me, I was like, oh, like surely the generic version of Tylenol is different than Tylenol. He was like, no, they're exactly the same. And I can specifically remember, I still think it, even though I understand it. I can remember thinking, I'm like, no, like I get that it's close to it, but surely it's 1% off. He's like, no, it's literally the exact same thing. I'm like, I don't understand. Why would somebody pay more for the brand name than the generic version? And that was my first, I didn't realize it then, but that was my first lesson in brand marketing and stuff. And to this day, I still think it's ridiculous to a certain degree, but I do it as well. It's, you don't even realize the effect that brand has on you until you're at the checkout line and you're like, what am I doing right now? Where am I?
Yeah, no, you're totally right. But also to this day, I still buy the brand name medication. Don't know why. I can't break the cycle.
There you go. You're breaking my dad's heart. My final marketing related question for you, and we'll do a couple fun ones. What keeps you up at night from a marketing or business standpoint? Heavy sigh is not a good start.
No, this is a tough one because I think we are in an interesting point of potential transition from where we've been over the past few years and the opportunity we've had through that. So almost contradicting everything I've said on this podcast.
I can't wait to do this. Do we have to do this? Do we have to do this again, Dave?
Yeah, wait for part 2. No, as big a piece as brand can play, what does it look like in a marketplace where we have to start selling again? Where demand isn't as strong as it maybe has been, but we've made all these efforts and shifts to focus on really brand and the storytelling. How do we maintain the integrity of that story that we've been building over the past few years within a market that forces us to really have to sell? And I don't have the answer to that. I think that literally does keep me up at night is, I want to make sure I'm protecting everything we've built and don't revert back to having to talk about the product. But, we'll see.
Take some brand name Unisom and put yourself to sleep. Maybe I get a pharmaceutical sponsor after this episode.
There you go. But yeah, so we'll see. I think the next year, it'll be super interesting to see what happens.
Sure. What was your very, very, very first job?
Oh, I was a line cook at a wellness club. So slinging burgers.
Okay. Do you think that prepared you for what you're doing now in any capacity? I feel everybody should work in restaurant in some capacity in their life.
I totally do too. How do I say this the right way?
We'll just bleep it out if it's too bad, Dave. Don't worry. We'll get my production team on it.
No, working with customers at a pretty affluent health and wellness club, I think definitely trains you for some customer service. And I think that has carried through my whole career. I think that bleeds into a lot of what I was saying before about just treating people like people, working with the agency like they're real people, not like they're, something there to serve me. I think understanding the other side of that and kind of customer service was huge.
Yeah. You're also one of the most chill marketers I've ever met in my life. I'm not kidding. You stay even keel everybody usually I just feel like has had 75 cups of coffee and we're just mutually bouncing off the walls, and you remain very even every time I've spoken with you and very calm and relaxed. So.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, my coworkers might say differently, but I'm glad that's the perception you get.
You're a monster. They're like, oh my God, Dave, he scares us.
No, that's amazing. But yeah, I think also just working in a kitchen, it's fast paced. You're learning. You always have to anticipate where someone else is going to move and what they're going to do so that what you're doing doesn't inhibit them doing their job. And I think that's something that applies to everything we do as well. Don't work in a silo. Always be considering what your colleagues and coworkers are going to be doing or needing or what their priorities are. Yeah. I just came up with that on the spot, but I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, marketing is a symphony. We'll go with that. I know you're a foodie in general. You like to cook. What would be your? I've been told calling it a death row meal is too morbid. But what would your final meal be if you had to pick?
Oh, I'm a sucker for a good smash burger.
Your own or from somewhere specific?
Not my own. Okay, there's two that I would happily take as my death row meal. Fred's, I think, is pretty close to unbeatable. Fred's smash burger.
I live across the street from Fred's.
Yeah, I used to live very close to it, and it was way too dangerous. So Fred's in Krog Street Market in Atlanta, for those of you maybe not local. Also, I recently found the Chastain burger. Have you?
I have only had. I'm going to have coffee there Friday morning,
dude.
I'll get a burger on the way out.
I will go as far as to say it might be my favorite burger I've ever had. It is
interesting. I put burgers in the category of when I'm in the mood for a burger, even a mediocre burger will satisfy my burger craving. And for me, I live next to Shake Shack, and I live for a Shake Shack.
You can't go wrong. I respect that. Do yourself a favor and try the burger at the Chastain.
What do I get on it? The full way, lettuce, tomato,
straight up,
and cheese? Okay.
It comes with everything you'll need.
Okay.
Cheesy,
I will
melty.
I will report back on Friday, hopefully.
There we go.
And then the final question I have for you: who is somebody who inspires you, either personally or professionally, or both?
Ooh.
Good opportunity to earn some brownie points and shout out your wife here.
I was
going to say your new wife. If you want to earn some points here.
For the record, I was going to say that before you prompted me to. No, definitely my wife. I mean, she's amazing. She is so creative and talented. She also works in marketing. So I think part of the reason our relationship is as strong as it is because when we talk about work or challenges we're facing, we actually understand what each other are talking about. There have been so many instances where I've presented a challenge or an issue, and she's just really brought a new and interesting perspective beyond my capabilities of arriving at on my own. And so I absolutely love and admire that kind of just constant ability to shed light on a situation differently. She also has a very, very keen eye for a beautiful aesthetic, which I don't think I ever would have thought mattered before meeting her. But it does. It comes into play, I think, just in a creative world that we live in, even in the space we live in. I think having a good eye for a good aesthetic really makes a difference.
Is this an underhanded way of calling yourself really good looking, Dave?
Oh, wow. No, I didn't. I was thinking more space and visual, but I mean, gosh, Daniel, if
you're like, Olivia has really good taste.
She does. Yeah. No, but I think I would also, I would say I have a good friend, actually. Yeah. My friend Sarah, who introduced us. Shout out Sarah Saxner.
Shout out Sarah.
She is a phenomenal human being, but she's one of those friends that's just warm and friendly and inviting. But then also every time we have an interaction, I'm challenged and I leave it contemplating something pretty deeply and just rethinking my perception on something. And I think friends like that in general are so key to have and surround yourself with for you to become the best type of person you can be. She's also the best just connector. I know she specializes in bringing people together. Again, that's how we found each other. So I definitely admire her and respect her.
I admire and respect the shit out of Sarah too.
Yeah.
Cool, Dave. This was awesome. This was maybe my favorite episode since it gave well, I'm being serious. I normally don't get this level of just behind the curtains, truthfully, of the actual process and the thinking. So I appreciate the openness. Where is the best spot for other agency vultures and salespeople to find you? I presume LinkedIn is the best spot to connect with you and see more of what's going on with you.
Yeah, go check out my LinkedIn. I need to be better at again distributing my content there.
Well, you'll have some content from this, Dave. You can distribute it to your heart's content.
Love it. Love it. No, this was great. Thank you so much for taking the time with me, Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. I will talk to you soon, and I can't wait to see the campaign and what comes from it.
Awesome.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you for checking out this episode of You Should Talk To. This show is brought to you by the company with the same name, You Should Talk To, a company that helps marketing leaders find the right agency or freelancer for their situation. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow You Should Talk To wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit YouShouldTalkTo.com for more information.